Welcome to this explainer. Today we're completely flipping the script on how we look at an unpredictable world. For way too long, the whole narrative around natural disasters has been just pure fatalism, right? This gloomy idea that we are entirely at the mercy of the earth, the sky, and the weather. But when you actually dive into the data and the current strategies for global resilience, a completely different story pops up. We are actively moving away from that helpless feeling and stepping right into actionable empowerment.
It really boils down to this one simple truth. Natural hazards test human resilience. Now, disasters are obviously the ultimate test of our survival. They disrupt, they destroy, and they totally upend our way of life. But here's the good news. Human ingenuity actually gives us the specific armor and the nervous systems we need to fight back against these recurring threats. Mitigation strategies? They aren't just a bunch of boring bureaucratic red tape. No, they are our literal blueprints for reducing impact and surviving.
So, let's get right into Section 1, Testing Resilience, moving from fatalism to empowerment.
Moving right along to Section 2. Here, we're securing the ground, looking specifically at earthquakes and landslides.
Let's talk about the absolute most terrifying example of shaky ground, earthquakes. They demand our attention immediately because, while they're destructive forces, sudden, it's chaotic, and it can be completely catastrophic. I mean, there's no weekly weather forecast for an earthquake, right? There is literally just the shock.
But honestly, it's kind of amazing how methodically we can fight back against something that's sudden. We engineer safety directly into the very bones of our cities. We do this by constructing earthquake-resistant buildings and retrofitting older structures that went up way before we really understood seismic science. But the physical structures, that's really only half the battle. We absolutely have to have strict enforcement of building codes. And on the human side of things, we rely heavily on early warning systems and regular community-wide drills. It's that perfect combo of a prepared building and a prepared human that gives us true readiness.
Now, staying in that same battleground of the Earth, landslides throw a totally different kind of threat at us. With landslides, it's not the shaking that destroys things, it's gravity. They turn the soil itself into a fast-moving, overwhelming hazard that just swallows everything in its path.
So how do we manage that specific risk? Through some really intense environmental manipulation. Things like slope stabilization and afforestation, which is basically planting trees so their deep root systems hold the earth together, are huge physical interventions. But just as crucial is the regulatory side. We have to actively restrict construction in known vulnerable zones. Plus, we kind of act like a planetary doctor, constantly monitoring soil movement and rainfall patterns. We watch for the symptoms so we can predict the danger long before the mountainside actually gives way.
Let's transition to Section 3, Taming Water and Weather. This covers floods, cyclones, and droughts.
Let's take the threat of cyclones first. These massive storms bring devastating winds and immense coastal surges that can, quite literally, wipe entire coastal communities off the map.
To mitigate this kind of unbelievable force, we have to layer our defenses. We combine physical, environmental barriers, like coastal shelter belts, which are basically natural buffers against the wind and waves, with hyper-resilient housing. But here's the thing, you can't just build a strong house and cross your fingers against a cyclone. You need advanced meteorological forecasting to see it coming from miles away. And you pair that with highly coordinated, life-saving evacuation plans and designated cyclone shelters to drastically cut down on casualties.
Now, when humanity deals with water, we are essentially playing a very high-stakes game of tug-of-war. The contrast here is actually pretty profound. Think about it. During floods, we engineer massive ways to forcefully push water away. But on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, during droughts, we are desperately trying to capture and hold on to every single precious drop.
Let's unpack the flood mitigation toolkit first. Our physical infrastructure includes these massive engineering feats, things like huge embankments, dams, and vastly improved drainage systems. We also lean on afforestation again, this time in catchment areas where water naturally collects just to slow down the flow. And crucially, we use floodplain zoning laws to keep folks out of harm's way, plus financial safety nets like disaster insurance to protect vulnerable populations when, the water inevitably breaches our defenses.
Conversely, fighting a drought requires an entirely different mindset, absolute preservation. The situation demands mass water conservation and widespread rainwater harvesting. Over in the agricultural sector, the shift is urgently moving toward planting drought-resistant crops and using highly efficient irrigation methods to maximize whatever little water is actually there. And because droughts directly threaten our very food supply, strong, proactive policy interventions are absolutely critical to ensure long-term food and livelihood security.
Moving right along to Section 4, navigating complex global threats, specifically industrial hazards and climate change.
First up in this category are industrial and chemical hazards. Now, unlike a hurricane that spans hundreds of miles across the ocean, these hazards are often highly localized. But they are incredibly dangerous and toxic, which means they require absolute precision to manage safely.
So we shield ourselves here, not with massive dams or forests, but through rigorous, uncompromising safety protocols. We require really precise hazardous waste management to make sure toxic elements never even get close to the public. And let's be real, because human error or mechanical failure is pretty much always a possibility, specialized emergency response training is critical. When a chemical hazard happens, first responders need to know exactly what they are dealing with in a matter of seconds.
And then, well, we have the ultimate overarching threat, the one that serves as a giant umbrella over literally everything we've talked about today, climate change-related disasters. We're seeing increased heat waves, steadily rising sea levels, and much, much more frequent extreme weather events.
Defeating this one, it requires a scale of action unlike anything else we've ever faced. It's essentially a synchronized global dance that requires genuine worldwide cooperation. The mitigation strategies here are massive structural shifts. We're talking about a worldwide adoption of renewable energy, strict carbon reduction policies, and completely rethinking how we sustainably plan and build our cities for the future. You just cannot fight climate change in isolation. It is, for sure, a globally interconnected battle.
Which brings us to Section 5, the two pillars of defense, structural versus non-structural measures. So how does true mitigation actually work behind the scenes? It really all boils down to two main things. First, our structural measures. Think of this as our physical armor. These are our engineering solutions, our infrastructure resilience, and physical barriers like massive seawalls and dams. But, as we all know, armor is completely useless if you don't know how to wear it or if you don't know when an attack is coming. And that brings us to our non-structural measures, our responsive nervous system. This is the education, the awareness, the legislation, the insurance, and the active community participation. A truly resilient society needs both, the hard armor of engineering and the sharp nervous system of policy and education working in perfect harmony.
Finally, Section 6, turning vulnerability into global resilience to safeguard lives and ecosystems. By intelligently applying these two pillars, the armor and the nervous system, across all three of the battlegrounds we've discussed today, we reach our ultimate resolution. Together, these measures successfully transform our inherent historical vulnerability into true global resilience. This transformation ensures that our societies aren't just sitting ducks waiting to be destroyed, but can actually withstand and quickly recover from these disasters. The ultimate goal is straightforward but deeply profound. Safeguard human lives, protect the livelihoods that sustain those lives, and preserve the fragile ecosystems that house us all.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder today. Are our communities truly ready to adapt through sustainable planning and global cooperation to survive tomorrow's extremes? Seriously, take a second to evaluate your own community's readiness. Look at your local infrastructure, dig into your local policies, and ask yourself, given everything we now know about how to mitigate these threats, are we doing enough today to guarantee our resilience tomorrow? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, stay prepared.